Hey everybody, it's Lon.TV. If you've got an electric vehicle, there's a good chance you don't have an AM radio in the car. And there's now an effort in Congress to mandate that every vehicle sold in the United States has an AM radio. And believe it or not, this bill has a lot of bipartisan support, and it might actually happen. So we're going to dig into what this mandate is all about and what it might mean for you right now. Now, today's video is being brought to you by Flexispot and their E7 Pro standing desk. I'm in my secondary shooting location here in the studio. I've got a mount up here in the ceiling, and I've got a GoPro. Now, I could stand on the desk, I could bring a chair over or a step stool or something, or I can push my preset here and be brought right up to my mount where I can safely put it into place using the Flexispot desk. And what's great about these desks is that they can hold a lot of weight. In fact, you could put another lawn and a half on this desk right now as I get my camera mounted. Flexispot desks can hold up to 440 pounds or 199 kilograms. They can go from a height of 25 inches to 50.6 inches. All versions have two powerful motors with a 3-stage design, and even the entry-level model that I have here is strong and sturdy and can easily lift me to the ceiling. Now, if you use the coupon code that you can see on screen, you'll get $50 off the price of your Flexispot desk, plus 30 days risk-free to try it. I want to thank Flexispot for their support of the channel. So let's dive into these radio mandates. The image in the background is of a 1990s era Mercedes-Benz. My father had one of these back then. And when I was a kid, I would ride with him to work. He would take me to work with him in the summer to earn a little extra money for my video games and stuff. And as we were driving up on his 30-minute commute, we were tuned to New York AM radio. It was WFAN in the morning. We would listen to Imus. And then in the afternoon, we were listening to 880, News Radio 88, on the way home. These stations broadcast at 50,000 watts out of New York, but they covered the entire tri-state area, Connecticut, New Jersey, and of course New York. And it was really something most people tuned into in the morning, New York AM radio. And of course things have changed quite a bit. WFAN is still going, but the other station, News Radio 88, just dropped their entire format and switched over to sports now, so that is gone. But Congress is looking to require that every vehicle sold in the United States, whether it's an EV or a gas-powered car or fusion-powered, needs to have an AM radio installed. And right now, there's a number of auto manufacturers that have been omitting the AM radio because the electric car motors interfere with radio reception on the AM bands. They resonate at a similar frequency to what AM radio operates at, and many just decided not to put the radios in at all and offer alternatives. So for example, my Tesla has an FM radio. It's kind of buried in the interface a bit, but it also works with HD radio, and many station owners own FM and AM stations, and there are a number of stations in the country, especially here in my home network of Connecticut, where you actually can tune into AM radio through a digital sideband on FM. So I think for a lot of these manufacturers, they felt there was enough for customers to get by with. And in the case of Tesla and I think BMW, they have not been putting AM radios in their cars for over 10 years, and there hasn't been a very big consumer backlash here. Now, in looking at the bill as it's winding its way through Congress, it has some wide bipartisan support. In the Senate, it has 60 co-sponsors, almost a veto-proof majority, although President Trump said he would sign the bill if it got to his desk. The House version of the bill has 241 co-sponsors, and as you can see, it's got almost an equal number of Republican and Democrat support here. So it's really happening, I think, and the reason why it's happening is that most cars right now are gas-powered cars that do have an AM radio. So the pain that this inflicts on the auto industry is minimal. And I think for many members of Congress, they all appear on AM radio talk shows in the morning, so they do have some affinity, I think, for the medium here, and they want to help support it. And it's just picked up a lot of momentum over the last year or so. Now, inside of these bills, it's very similar between the House and Senate versions. Basically, it gives the Secretary of Transportation a year to come up with a formal rule to require that every vehicle sold in the United States can receive AM broadcast stations. Now, there is one carve-out in the bill to allow an electric vehicle manufacturer to use a digital-only AM radio, as opposed to an analog one. That might be a little easier for an EV manufacturer to integrate because they can run some error correction and maybe some other routines to allow the signal to come through without having to add a lot of weight with different types of shielding technology. So that's one area that might make this a little more palatable, or at least digestible perhaps, for the automakers. Now they're also, though, looking to conduct a study in the bill to require the GAO to look at how people can receive emergency notifications and whether or not AM radio is the best way to get them. Additionally, the bill has a 10-year sunset, which means 10 years after its passage, the bill will expire unless Congress renews it. This is kind of common in many pieces of federal legislation. So what are folks saying about this? Well, the NAB, which in their current work on the television transition doesn't want to be regulated anymore, but like the television transition, they're happy to impose regulation on others, and they are praising this bill as it's been making its way through the Congress. One of the chief proponents of the bill, Senator Ed Markey from Massachusetts, did a study of his own where he reached out to different automakers and was one of the first people to come out against the effort here to remove AM radio from vehicles. And he brings up this notion of emergency alert infrastructure and how important it is to have AM radios in cars so people can receive important information if they have to be evacuated or they're just not at home when something happens. Now, the messaging from Senator Markey here is interesting because he's pointing to how the internet can be unreliable as a method of receiving emergency communications. Yet, as we've been talking about here on the channel, broadcasters are encrypting their television signals, and in many cases, you need an internet connection to watch over-the-air television. So I wonder what he might say if we were to ask him about ATSC3 encryption as it relates to emergency communications. Perhaps they should put in a bill to ban encryption on the airwaves while they're mandating broadcast AM radios. Now, there is, of course, some opposition to this bill. The CTA, the Consumer Technology Association, has been spending a lot of money opposing this mandate. They started an ad campaign last year. I wonder if they did any AM radio ads that targeted the D.C. area so members of Congress and their staffers could learn more about it. Additionally, they did a study following the big nationwide emergency broadcast test they did a few years ago. That test pinged every phone in the country in addition to television and radio and other services that are required to carry the emergency broadcast message. And it happened all at the same time. And the CTA commissioned a study following that to see what people remembered about it. And they said 9 in 10 people, 95%, recalled getting the alert on their smartphone. 15% heard it on television, and that includes cable streaming or over-the-air antenna watching. 6% remembered hearing it on the radio, but only 1% reported hearing it on AM radio. Additionally, the Alliance for Automotive Innovation, which is an industry group, says it's going to cost $3.8 billion to fix this problem in vehicles, likely due to engineering costs and R&D, and also having to develop some technology to try to filter out the noise that the EV motors generate that interferes with the radio signals. There was a report done by the Center for Automotive Research as to how to do this, and there's actually no one way to fix the EV AM radio problem. So one is shielding, which can be heavy. You can put some filters in place. You can put active noise cancellation on. You can adjust the placement of antennas. You can add multiple antennas. You can do a total redesign. Or the last one, which is what most went with, which is the removal of analog AM radio. Of note, this law does not require that the signal be a good one, just that the radio has to be installed in the car. So what many manufacturers might do is just try to get it good enough so you could hear it at least, but it's going to be a lot more staticky than it would be in an internal combustion engine vehicle. But why AM? What's the big deal about AM radio beyond the fact that many members of Congress appear on talk shows on AM radio? Well, the big argument, of course, is range. AM stations just go further than FM stations do, especially at night. And the reason is that they're at a much lower frequency. So as you can see in the US, the AM stations start at 530 kilohertz and go up to 1.7 megahertz, where your FM stations are usually in the VHF range, which is 88 to 108 megahertz. And the frequencies behave very differently because of their wavelengths. So for example, Daytime range on an AM station can be 100 to 200 miles depending on the power of the transmitter and how it is designed. But at night, because it can bounce off the atmosphere, you can get far greater ranges, 1,000+ miles sometimes. And if you've got a region of the country that gets wiped out by some natural disaster, having the ability to broadcast into that area is quite beneficial. And the only way that becomes useful is if people have a radio that can pick up the signal. And if you have some big disaster, there's a good chance that people will be in their cars traveling away from whatever danger is there. So there's definitely some logic here to maintaining AM radio, especially in cars. And if we look at the range of these stations, this is WFAN's map according to radiolocator.com. And as you can see here, during the day, it reaches a good chunk of the Northeast United States, and it can go even further at night. This is the most powerful FM station that I have in the region here. This one's out of Long Island, WBLI. They're actually broadcasting at the same power level, 50,000 watts, but you can see the footprint here is much lower. This is a popular FM station in Connecticut that broadcasts at 20,000 watts, and they have their antenna up on some terrain, so it's pretty high up. And you can see it does cover a good swath of the land here, but it doesn't have the range that an AM station does, especially at night. So who listens to AM radio? Well, the FCC did a study back in 2009, and back then, persons aged 12 to 24 were only about 4% of that demographic was listening to AM, but they were listening to FM in a much greater number, 96%. And even in older age groups back then, 25 to 34-year-olds, AM was only about 9% of listening in that demographic, whereas FM was 91%. And they found back in 2009 that the median age for AM was 57 years old, a full generation older than the median age of FM listeners. Now, I did my own study here from my YouTube polling feature. Now, this is not a scientific study, but 72% of you do not listen to AM radio, 24% of you do, 5% do, but through a streaming app. And I dug around a little bit more to see what else I could find on radio consumption habits, and surprisingly, things are higher than I thought they would be. So the Pew Research Center did a study back in 2023. They did incorporate some of their own data, but this first one came from Nielsen, which is the agency that monitors radio audiences. And as of 2022, about 82% of Americans were tuning into AM or FM radio in a given week. They also found that nearly half of U.S. adults are getting some news from that radio broadcast. But another study conducted by the Edison Research Group and passed around by broadcasters as a reason why you got to keep advertising on radio, I think tells the truth behind why this mandate is becoming such a big issue. If you look at this slide, since 2017, daily podcast listeners have increased across all demographics. The older the demographic, the greater the growth. And you can see 733% among people aged 45 to 54, 750%, 55 to 64, and 65 plus up 600%. This is radio's bread and butter that podcasting is eating into. And what this study found is that most people listen to podcasts at home, not in the car. And when they're in the car, they are listening to AM or FM radio over the air. And another study conducted by the Census Bureau found that most people commute by driving alone. So if you take the radio out of the car and now you've got a button for podcasts, what do you think people might push instead of the radio button? And I think that might be driving a lot of why the broadcasters are trying to put this mandate into place to maybe try to hold on to things a little bit longer. I don't know if that's going to work because, of course, it doesn't restrict a broadcaster from putting a podcast button in the car, but this is something they think they need to do to hang on to their business. Now, in the course of conducting my unofficial, unscientific study here, I did have some interesting comments that kind of backed up what we're seeing in this data. So Ralph here misses AM radio and talk shows, but he doesn't drive anymore, so he doesn't listen anymore. That kind of backs up what we just saw. JJ2ME listens every day to and from work. Traffic and weather on the 8s, that was my slogan on News Radio 880. but for him it's News Radio 950 AM. XC Spade says, at least once a week on my commute, I enjoy listening to music on AM. He likes that crackly, low fidelity sound. And Scooter here, when I worked, I used to get traffic reports. I'm retired now, and AM radio has nothing for me, and I grew up with it. So anecdotally here, we're seeing some real alignment with the data. So I think that is why we're seeing this AM radio mandate. They want to keep that radio button available for folks, and they don't want auto manufacturers cutting it out in place of online services. And at the moment, if you've got a phone, of course, you can tune into this stuff, but it is a little difficult to get your phone working the way you need it to for streaming, which is why I think radio is still the default and still listened to a lot more than you might think. And it's funny how all of our individual experiences kind of come into play here. I've been listening to podcasts exclusively in my car for 20 years. I just stopped listening to radio when I could get a bunch of stuff on my iPod and listen to it. But clearly people who commute do still listen to the radio, and most Americans do commute by themselves in their car. Let me know what you thought down in the comments section. And until next time, this is Lon.TV. Thanks for watching.